Hello and welcome to the video. This is all about auto launch, part of INAV that just allows you to throw your plane into the air and INAV will do the rest. Now this is really handy if you are a pilot on your own and you haven't got a buddy to throw it for you. I would always recommend, if you're going to maiden a model, get somebody to go to the field with you, and for models like this I would always kind of throw it by holding it here and throwing it into the air, but just similarly I tend to also launch by holding it by the root of the wing and throwing it into the air as well. But auto launch takes away a lot of the complexity, because a lot of my friends who are getting into fixed wing, particularly coming from the quadcopter side of the hobby, are really struggling to get models into the air and damaging some beautiful models they've spent hours and hours and hours in building. Particularly expensive, heavier models, things like the Carpena 2 wings from Team Black Sheep, things like the Nano and the Mini Drax that are building. When they're all built up and you've got the centre of gravity in the right place, they can be quite heavy models. And if you get it wrong, then you're basically throwing them into the ground, and it just is heartbreaking. So this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the process of what auto launch is and how you use it, and then show you the settings that I use in INAV, and then show you how it actually works at the field. So the first thing to talk about then is how auto launch actually works. Now auto launch, as I'll show you in a minute, can be set up as a flight mode, so you can just select it with a switch. However, I select it so that it is always on. As soon as you arm the model, then the model is ready to throw into the air. As soon as you throw it, it'll be detected that it's thrown. It'll then stay level, lift the nose up to the preset number of degrees, about 18 degrees by default, I think it is, and then it will spin up the throttle to 1700. So not full throttle, but just under by default. Again, I change these, more of that in a moment, and it will just fly away. And then as soon as you touch the sticks, auto launch will be cancelled, and it will just continue in whatever mode you've got set, you know, acro, manual or whatever. Now some people, what will do is they will arm the model, put it into return to home, not touch any of the sticks, and then throw it, and what will happen at the end of the auto launch cycle, it will then go into return to home and kind of fly back and circle over your head. That's quite a neat way to do it. However, I just tend to just throw it, and as soon as it's kind of at decent altitude, touch the sticks, and that cancels the auto launch. But that's the other tip as well. If you're worried about turning auto launch on full time as a mode, and I understand why you might be, what happens is as soon as you put it into armed for the INAV system, it's in auto launch mode. If you don't want to auto launch it, if you want to manual mode it, just move one of the sticks and it will come out of auto launch. It's dead easy to do. So with that said, let me go onto the bench and show you how I set all of the parameters up in INAV so it works great for me. So here on the desk, let me plug in my Nano Drac and let me go through all the different settings that I set and use here for auto launch. Now the first thing we're going to have to do is obviously plug it into the computer and then click on connect, and then we're going to have to set up how we want auto launch to work. Now by default I set auto launch to be turned on all the time. Now you can set this to be off and set it up as a mode, but by having it permanently set on, it means that whenever I arm the fixed wing INAV aircraft, it's ready to be thrown into the air and to fly away under its own steam. You can cancel it at any point by just moving any of the other controls on the radio, but it does mean that as soon as you arm it, you can just throw it into the air and away it goes. You don't have to worry about assigning another mode or another setup. So this is the way that I would recommend that you do it. It's always ready to go. Unfortunately, all the other settings that you need are in the CLI, not in the graphical user interface. So everything you need to have a look at, or pretty much everything, is going to be in set nav underscore fixed wing underscore launch. And here's all the settings. Now I'm going to go through these very quickly and explain what they are. I personally would recommend, if you're looking at this stuff, have a look at the manual link below. It goes through it in detail. So the first one is launch velocity. That's how hard you've thrown it, I guess. And by default it's set to 300. I'd normally turn that down. Next one is launch acceleration. Again, detecting how hard you've thrown the thing. 1863 is on the lower end. I would turn that down just a smidgen, and we'll do that in a minute. Reducing both of those will help it detect when it's been launched a lot easier. Max angle is 45 by default. I would set that to 180 so that if you accidentally move it over 45 degrees away from level, then it's still quite happy. Launch detect time, I would leave that as it is. Launch throttle, that's the throttle that it's going to spin the motor at while it is climbing. 1700 is fine for most models. If it's heavier, then I would potentially increase that to 1800, 1850, or even 1900. Launch idle throttle, that is what the motor is going to do while it's waiting for you to chuck it. 1000 will mean that the motor isn't running at all. I would, on heavier models, increase that so the prop is running slowly, and the reason for that is that it takes less time to spin up from 1000 to 1700 or what you have got set if the prop is already spinning rather than going from a standing start, and that can sometimes mean the difference between a successful throw and an unsuccessful throw. So be careful with that. You don't want to have the prop running if you're going to have your hands near it, because that is just going to end in tears. So we are going to come back to that. On this one, because it's quite a heavy model, I am going to set it, but that it does mean I'm going to be throwing it from holding the wing rather than anywhere else. Launch motor delay is set to 500. I will drop that down. 500 is basically half a second. That can be way too long, and that absolutely can mean the difference between a successful throw and an unsuccessful one. Launch spin up time, I'd keep that as default, particularly if the prop is already spinning. Launch minimum time, leave that at 0. Launch timeout, I would probably double that to 10,000, just to give you a little bit longer, so that when you go and you're getting ready, when you arm it, if you need to take a second, just make sure you've got a good grip before you throw it. It doesn't time out. And then the last one is the max altitude. I would leave that at 0. And leave the climb angle at 18. Lots of people have their own particular views on that, whether that's too much, too little. 18 is not a bad place to start. So let's start changing some of these to be what I would use. The first one is, let's set the launch velocity. Rather than 300, I would halve that to 150, and that is going to detect it an awful lot quicker. Similarly with launch acceleration. Launch acceleration isn't bad. I again would just drop that a smidgen down to about 1500. Again, that's just going to give us a much better chance of detecting when it's being thrown, and detect it quicker as well. Next one we're going to do then is the max angle. Let's set that to the maximum of 180. Then that means if I accidentally move it over 45 degrees, it's going to cancel everything. Then next one is going to be launch motor delay. I will reduce that a lot. Rather than go from half a second, I'll drop that down to 100, which is a tenth of a second. So it's pretty much as soon as it detects that it's been thrown, it'll spin up, and that should mean that it's still out of your hand, but only just. Again, if you're worried about that, I would maybe set that 200 or 300. Launch timeout, again, we're just going to double that to 10,000. It's going to give us a little bit longer to get ourselves sorted out, although to be fair, when you're using this stuff, just don't arm it until you're ready to throw it. And then there's only a couple left now. The launch throttle. Now, because this is a heavy model, I am going to increase it and probably set it something like 1850. It gives a little bit of headroom, but that's absolutely going to make sure that there's enough thrust to catch it and for it to also rise into the air. And then I'm going to set the idle throttle to be something like 1300. Again, use this with extreme caution. I'm setting it like this so that the throttle will run as soon as auto launch is ready, and then it's much faster to go from 1300 to 1850 when it detects it's been thrown. Right, with that all saved, let's go to the field and let me show you the process to actually get this thing into the air. So before we go to the field and I show you some examples of me and one of my best flying buddies actually throwing some wings into the air using the settings that we've just gone through, let me just go through the setup and how you do everything on the radio. Now, it's very simple. There's only three things that we need to do. We need to arm the model, we need to put the throttle to 100%, and then we need to give the model a good level throw into the air. Now, those are the only three things that you need to do. If you really wanted to, you could also flick something like your return to home switch, but you know what? For this video, let's just keep it really simple so that it's easy to follow. So when you are at the field, you have a GPS lock and you're ready to launch, the process is simple. You flick the arm switch, armed. You put the throttle to 100%, and then at that point, if you have the motor set to a low revolution, it'll start gently spinning at the back of the model, and then immediately throw it strongly into the air, and INAV will immediately detect that it has been thrown and away it goes. Now, there are only a couple of caveats with this. Of course, having a spinning prop is going to be inherently dangerous, so always use that on models where you just need that little bit of help, and potentially try it without first. Secondly, if you are trying to do this and you just can't get the model to climb into the sky, it's probably because the motor and prop combination that you have on the back of the model is not producing enough thrust. Even an average throw with these kind of settings and a model that has enough thrust, the model will recover itself and climb cleanly into the sky. So again, last one here, let me just demo it. So when you are ready to go and you're all set, because we have auto launch permanently enabled, we arm the model, armed, put the throttle to 100%, and then throw it into the air. Now, to turn off auto launch, we just move one of the controls and that will immediately disable the auto launch and away you go. So that's how I set it up. Let's just jump to the field and I'll show you a couple of examples of how this actually works in practice. So here's the first one. This is my ZOHD Brain Dart. The Dart is a great model without a flight controller, but it's exactly the same. So I'm going to arm the model, raise the throttle to 100%, the prop will spin slowly, I'll throw it into the air, it'll catch itself, and away it goes. Here's one of my flying buddies, Ross, who is probably the best wing launcher I know, and he's going to throw my mini drac. And I like, particularly for these kind of drac models, things like the Campaigner 2, things that are quite heavy models but powerful, I do like the prop slowly spinning just to make sure that it absolutely doesn't end up stuck in the ground. So I'm going to arm the model, put the throttle to 100%, and he will throw it by holding it in the wing, throwing it hard and level, and away it goes. So there you go, that's how I set up auto launch. Hopefully that helps those of you that are struggling with this. It can be tricky when you are on your own in a place and you're trying to get this stuff working, but that is the way that I set my wings up and it works fantastically well here. Thank you for watching my video and watching right to the very end. If you want to find out what I'm currently working on, you can follow me on social media by searching for Painless360 in the usual places. If you'd like to become part of the inner circle, then you can become a Patreon. Details are in the description and you get lots of additional benefits. Check out the playlist section on the channel too. I organise all of my videos into playlists and it's called something like Introduction to or for Beginners. All of the content is aimed so that you can start at the very beginning and it teaches you that subject, starting with simple principles and moving up to teach you everything you need to know.